Welcome to Baby Boomer Tales. My name is Jim. Thank you for riding along today. You can find us at babyboomertales.com. You can also find our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and you can email us at babyboomertales@gmail.com. On February 4th, 2019, we launched our first podcast episode titled From Being a Child to Becoming a Young Adult. Now, in 2 months, we'll celebrate our 5th birthday, and today we're recording our 253rd episode. Every Wednesday, since February of 2019, we have presented a new episode. Sometimes it becomes a grind. We've evolved, though. The stories, which are my favorite type of episode, are harder to come up with. I went to Colorado this summer in hopes of jump-starting my brain into remembering some of the stuff I used to do when I was younger. But it was a whirlwind trip. I had a family reunion we went to, and that really took up most of my time. I went up a little early so I could take some pictures, and I was just telling my wife last night that that trip really didn't do much as far as ideas for podcasts. And she informed me that I should have stayed longer, that we could have stayed as long as I wanted to, but it's my nature to want to beat feet for home, which is very, very true. I don't think I have the explorer mentality I used to have, where just go for it. I would just take off with 30 cents in my pocket, and the only other thing would be a toothbrush, and off I would go. Not now, not even close. I like to think it's because as I get older I become wiser, but I think I become more of a homebody. I really like it at home. I really do. So anyway, I didn't stay up there except for the day the family reunion started, and I left the day that it ended. So what do? So the stories are a little bit harder to come up with, but once in a while I'll think of something. Anymore, I just have to do other things that are baby boomer related. I have things like the top 10 55 years ago. That's the top 10 popular songs this week 55 years ago, or this week in 1968. Number 10, White Room by Cream. Number 9 by Johnny Nash, Hold Me Tight. Number 8, Wichita Lineman, Glenn Campbell. Number 7, For Once in My Life, Stevie Wonder. Number 6, Who's Making Love by Johnny Taylor. Number 5 by Dion, Abraham, Martin, and John. Number 4, Those Were the Days, Mary Hopkin. Number 3 by Steppenwolf, Magic Carpet Ride. Number 2 by the Beatles, Hey Jude. And the number 1 song this week 55 years ago by Diana Ross and the Supremes, Love Child. I also do the Song of the Week. It happens several times a month, and it's never on the same week as we do the top 10 55 years ago. We do unusual facts like, oh, that sound effect, that's my idea of a zipper opening and at the end of it a zipper closing. Our unusual fact this week: in 2007, Oklahoma made watermelon the state vegetable. What made this unusual for me is I always think of watermelon as a fruit, but in reality it's a gourd. Any melon is, I think, classified as a vegetable. Don't hold me to that. I'm just winging it like I most often do. I also have the munchies. We have Get the Munchie and got the munchie and had the munchie.
Hey!
I decided to start using them when we had the housekeeping segment where I correct some errors from past podcasts. But they, interject something every once in a while. A lot of times when I don't want them to. They're just around here. They look like a cornflake, only they're about, foot tall. Weird little creatures, but they're nice. I like them. I'm going to keep them, I think. Then we have Kate's General Store. I think everyone who's listened to this podcast is probably familiar with Kate's General Store. It's set in 1980 right now, soon to be 81, first of the year. But we started it in 1976. The whole reason we set it in this era is to play off of some of the technology and the history and the news and the TV shows and all that, the music and all that of the 70s and early 80s. We have Homer Cates. He's the lead role. His wife Katie and their kid Kitty. Her dad Pop. Pop just got married to Mrs. Dumas. Now Mrs. Dumas was a lady that I used to carry her groceries down to the Trail Riders Motel back in my little hometown. She'd always tip me a dime. My brother John and I would kind of fight over who got to deliver Mrs. Dumas her groceries. Well, that character has evolved into Pop's wife now. We also have Jerry and his dog Sparky. Jerry is Homer's very best friend. Hey Jerry, what do you think about us being in this, producing a podcast episode? Homer, I don't even know what a podcast is. Oh yeah, I forgot. We're in 1980. I'm sorry, Jerry. That's okay, Homer. I know you always come up with some wild and crazy stuff. That's right, Jerry. That Homer, I think he just lays in bed at night and thinks this stuff up. Now for a little episode called Forky and Earl. On the first day of kindergarten, little Early went to school and sat there the whole day until noon, and then he got to go home. Little Early, and his name was Little Early because his grandpa was Earl the First and his dad was Earl the Second and Earl was Earl the Third, so they just called him Early. And he was walking home. He had to go the long way around, and the street was not paved. It was just a gravel street, and he was kicking rocks and singing to himself. And he looked up, and lo and behold, there was a big old porcupine in the road. And little Early looked at that porcupine, and that porcupine looked back at little Early, and little Early took off and ran back to the school. Oh, he was so tired by the time he got back to the school, and there were some kids there playing, and little Early saw this one kid that he had seen him in kindergarten that day, and he had this plastic sword and plastic shield, and he said, I just ran into a porcupine on the way home. What's your name, kid? And the kid looked at little Early and says, what's your name? And little Early said, I'm Early. And the kid said, well, you don't look that early to me. I'm going to call you Earl. And little Early said, that's what they call my dad. And the kid said, well, now I call you Earl. And Earl said, what's your name? And the kid said, Fork. And little Earl said, I'll call you Forky. So Forky and Earl walked back the way that Earl had been to find the porcupine. And Forky said, I've got this sword and shield. We can hunt us this porcupine. And Earl said, Forky, that sword and shield are just plastic. And Forky said, don't tell the porcupine that, Earl. So Earl and Forky walked up looking for the porcupine, which they never found. But from that moment on, Forky and Earl were the best of friends. Also, we do lists things like different decades. I'll go through the decade of coming up, probably next year will be the decade of the 90s. And we do some of the high points of that decade. We do all-time music songs, some of my very, very favorites. We do television, usually in a different decade, like the decade of the 1990s. Where do I get my ideas? This is the hard part. Like all of a sudden an idea will come upon me when I'm taking a shower. They say that warm water spraying on you releases endorphins that you become very, very creative. Well, usually by the time I'm out of the shower, I forget that idea. But if I'm watching TV or driving or falling asleep or something, if an idea comes upon me, I take my phone and speak into my notes and capture that idea. I later put it into a spreadsheet, so I may be able to use that later on. If I didn't have that tool, I may have run out of ideas 200 episodes ago. So I'm always looking at ideas. Something like, I'll think of one of my friend's parents, and that'll kind of snowball into something that I remember doing with that family. And maybe I can put together a podcast with that. Something like that. One thing my podcast has is we are rated PG. You're not going to hear the F-bomb here. I try to make it so my grandchildren can listen to it, and it's a safe place for anybody to enter into. I hope I always keep that. I don't know why I wouldn't. I really think a lot of television shows right now are being ruined by that, where it's not even necessary. It doesn't even go along with the storyline. And they throw that in there, one after the other. I've stopped watching a bunch of TV shows just because of that. When I publish a podcast, I have to credit any kind of song or sounds or whatever that I don't create myself that is a licensed product. This is very tricky because a lot of these sound effects that I use may be a public domain and don't need license. Some of them are public domain, but they need licenses. And so it's almost a slippery slope. So I'm always going over and making sure that I give credit where credit is due. Now, a lot of places that put my podcast out there, even though I listed on my main podcast host, maybe they just put the title and not all the credits that go along with it. But if you click on, you can find that if you look. You should always give credit where credit is due. Well, this is my third installment of producing a podcast. The first one I talked about how I got this whole thing started and how I made my webpage and all that stuff. The second one I kind of filled in the blanks of stuff I forgot in the first one. This one I just needed to probably vent a little on how hard it is to come up with an idea and what a grind it can be. But it is my pleasure and my honor to be able to share this stuff with all of you that listen. And I can never, ever tell you how thankful I am that you take a few minutes out of your week to hear a podcast episode of Baby Boomer Tales. Well, that'll do it this week. Remember to always be kind. There's really no other way. I'll be back next Wednesday. Peace out.
Where's Homer? Homer! Homer!
Here I am, sweet potato pie. Did you learn how to make a podcast, Katie?